Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to a video about the new upcoming artifact sets in 4.0. Now, the artifact sets have been officially announced, but I will be talking about some of the leaked characters in the second portion of this video when I focus on the Marechaussee crit artifact set. So if you don't want to hear about any leaks, just be aware of that. I'll try to put timestamps for like when the leaks start and when they stop, so you can use that if you want to avoid leaks. But yeah, the rest of the video is just going to be focusing on the effects of the artifact sets on the currently available roster. So let's just start right into it. I basically just categorized all the characters and how well the set works for them. When it comes to these characters, right, so we're going to start by talking about the Golden Troupe artifact set, which gives you 20% skill damage on the 2-piece, and then the 4-piece gives you 25% skill damage, increased by an additional 25% when you're not on field, and which stays active for 2 seconds when you do swap on field. Now, the way that this works is, at least I would not expect the damage percent effect from that to be snapshotable, which means I expect it so that even if you don't have the buff and you cast a snapshotable ability and then you swap out, I do expect you to actually gain it. But the reality is that there's no real convention for this. Hoyo has been very inconsistent when it comes to which buffs can snapshot and which buffs can't. Even buffs that are worded incredibly similarly, like the Ali Hunter and the Serpent Spine buff. Well, Serpent Spine snapshot, but Ali Hunter doesn't. So just be aware that it is possible it doesn't work exactly like this. That being said, it almost just doesn't matter, because the characters that have a snapshotable ability and that then want to be swapped out, very often will snapshot it before they are on field for 2 seconds, and the ones that don't snapshot, well, won't be affected by this anyways. Obviously, it's a massive buff to Fischl. I think that's like the by far the biggest change from the artifact set is just going to be a massive buff to Fischl. For those of you who didn't know, Fischl's Ascension 4 talent is actually considered elemental skill damage, which means that it will actually get increased unless they just decide to specifically make it not work for it, which would again be very inconsistent. But inconsistency hasn't stopped Hoyo from scabbing us before, so it is still possible they decide to just make it not work. But this is considered elemental skill damage, so that means that the new set is going to increase her damage, basically all of her damage except the burst initial cast, which isn't skill damage. Everything else that Fischl does, at least all the electro damage that she does, I guess you could count her physical hits, but come on, is elemental skill damage, which means that almost all of her damage is going to get a pretty massive increase. It hovers around 15% of an increase versus other sets. It can basically range anywhere between closer to 10 and closer to 20, or maybe even more, but generally it's about 15. It's a very big increase from an artifact set. Like that's Pog. That's very good. Fischl loves that. That being said, she is not the only character who will benefit from this. Characters like Yae Miko can also benefit from it quite a bit. Yae won't benefit from it as much as Fischl does because her elemental burst won't benefit from it at all. So that means that when you're looking at AoE situations where there's enough enemies that your burst represents a majority of your damage, the set can actually be a downgrade over other available options. But I'd say that in most situations it will be an upgrade, and it's a pretty decent one at that. For those of you who didn't follow leak cycles, like beta cycles, the set actually got buffed from one version of the beta to another. It used to be a total of 60%, now it's a total of 70%. I think that's because they didn't want the set to be only used for Fischl, and that additional 10% was actually enough to make a difference for so many characters, and I think I would include Yae in that, where before the buff, it was her best set in a bunch of teams, but there were also a lot of teams where it just wasn't really worth using, in my opinion. But with that buff, I think that it is worth using. So yeah, pretty big buff for Yae. And then another character that people might not think about too much is GOMC. Now, people don't think about GOMC because GOMC kind of sucks, and that's fair. But if you do play them, then you will deal damage less than 2 seconds after swapping in, which means that you effectively gain 70% skill damage. And GOMC's elemental skill is their main source of damage, which means that if you are using GOMC in your team for like battery plus damage, it will be their best set. There's an argument to be made for Emblem if you also need the ER to also be good, because GOMC does do a little bit of damage with burst as well. Like the burst isn't useless, but if you're playing GOMC optimally, you're getting your E explosions to hit the enemy enemy as well, right? So for those of you who don't know, GOMC has, I think it's a constellation that makes it so that when your E gets destroyed, it will explode and deal the same damage that it did when you summoned it. But that also includes when it gets destroyed by you summoning a 4th Geoconstruct, or when it gets destroyed by just expiring because it's been out for too long. Which means that every single elemental skill can have the potential to hit twice. And well, that can be an issue when enemies are just not tanky enough to survive long enough for you to be able to do 4 different skills, and like that's part of why GOMC is not that good overall. If you do focus on that playstyle and you like it, then it is a nice thing to have for it. But yeah, next I'm gonna be talking about the 3 characters where it's also a very good set, but I mean, it's also a very good set, but there are a few mitigating factors that make it a bit less good than on these 3. So first is Nahida. With Nahida, if you're not on fielding her, so you're like all of your damage is coming from your skill, it's basically just strictly better than Gilded, assuming you manage to balance out your EM anyways. So the thing is, if you're using Gilded, especially if you're using an EM weapon with Gilded, you get a lot of elemental mastery, and you can't go triple EM, otherwise you're going to be over 1,000 EM, which will be not very good, right? Like, you don't really want that. If you use the exact same artifacts on Golden Troupe as you do on Gilded, it's not actually going to be an increase in damage because, well, you're going to be at like 600 EM instead of 800. But if you use an EM Goblet instead of a Dendro Goblet, for example, it will actually be stronger for the skill damage. Now, I only calc for like 1 level of investment. It is possible that there are some conditions that can make Gilded slightly better. And I don't think that the difference is like huge enough to justify farming for a whole new set if you already have a good Gilded set for her. But it's just a nice thing to know if you don't already have a good Gilded set for her and you're not really interested in farming that domain, but you are interested in farming the domain for some of your other characters, right? Like if you're using Nahida in Quicken teams where she's the only Dendro unit, you don't really want her on Deepwood because, well, you're reducing Dendro res for only her, and then Deepwood is only about as good as the damage options and not just like strictly better like it is in Hyperbloom and Burgeon teams. And if you are playing her in a Quicken team with only 1 Dendro, it is actually fairly likely that you have Fischl on the team, and Fischl wants the new skill set, so you can kind of knock out 2 birds with 1 stone and consolidate your artifact farming all in 1 domain, which is nice. But it's not worth going for the artifact just for her. Next up is Albedo, where it's basically just a very similar thing, with the main difference that the other characters with Albedo, or in Albedo's teams, often want Husk just like him, which makes it a little bit more questionable to farm the new artifact for him, but it can be a slight increase under certain circumstances, and I would say for most people it would be a slight increase, but not a very big one. And finally, Hazo. It can be very good for Hazo for the same reasons why it can be very good for GOMC, because most of Hazo's damage comes from elemental skill, but a bit less of his damage comes from skill. And if you swap him on field with 0 stacks, by the time you get 4 stacks, the buff will have expired, so you have to swap out and then swap back in, which means that at least for the first rotation, your first E, it is going to require a slightly different setup than you might otherwise be doing, which might not be worth it to some. But I say that, but Hazo is like a carry is just not a very good character. So if you're willing to play a Hazo Hyper team, you're probably willing to learn a new rotation just for it, which is why I'm still putting it in like competitive. And then finally, you have the characters for whom the new set, like the new skill set, can be good, but only for like niche builds or meme builds. So Pharazon, if you have C6 Pharazon, it basically used to be that you would strictly want to use TOM on her. Now you also have the option to build her for damage instead. Although you would still like build for damage on TOM, but like you now have the option to give her a set for damage rather than a set for support. They're about as good as each other. I haven't done like in-depth calcs on a lot of different situations. My expectation is that it's going to be slightly better than TOM if you're not vertically invested, if you don't have like constellations on your Wanderer or Shao, stuff like that, and slightly worse if you do. One thing to keep in mind though is TOM does buff shield strength, which actually can make a pretty big difference, at least in Wanderer teams, maybe a bit less in Shao teams, then still to some extent in Shao teams. Having a stronger shield is not something that you'll always notice, but you'll notice not having it, basically. So I would still, like, if I had C6 Pharazon, I probably still would use her in TOM, but it is a new option for her build, which is, you know, good to have. Next up, Amber. It's no secret that Amber is not particularly good, but if you want to go for a funny number, Baron Bunny C2 explosion build, the new set can work for that. You will have to be careful because if you swap into her, use E, aim and shoot, I don't actually think it's possible to do all of that in less than 2 seconds. So you would have to like use E, swap out, and then swap back to her and shoot. But Amber mains are very dedicated, so I think that's definitely something they might be willing to do. So yes, it's a bit of a niche thing. It's definitely not great, but if that is a build that you're interested in doing, then this can actually be very good for it. Beto, kind of a similar thing. Like, Beto's parry is not what makes her good. What makes her good is her burst, but her parry is funny, and it does big number. So if you want funny big number, then you can use the set on her. Jean doesn't really have a good set in a lot of teams. In teams where she's your only animo character, obviously you're going to use VV. In teams where you use her with other animo characters, maybe you want her on Noblesse, but if someone else is on Noblesse, it kind of restricts, kind of just don't have a good thing for her. So you can use her on the new set, but it's just whatever. Klee, kind of similar thing. It's not going to be her best set for sustained damage, but if you like funny jumpy dumpty damage, she does actually front load a lot of motion value with her E. It's like almost 1,000 motion value at town level 9, and you have 2 charges of it. So you can get funny numbers, funny jumpy dumpty, big damage cool pog, which is a bit of a meme thing, but it works. Again, similar thing for Sucrose, right? If you want a double E nuke. Similar thing for Xiangling, if you want a Globa. First thing, so I actually don't think it's as niche. I think that people very often underestimate how much damage you can get from Xingqiu's E. On the average team, it is not going to be good, but if you're playing specifically the Sucrose national team with him on Sack Sword, then you can actually front load a lot of damage with his skill, and it can be a viable set for him, even though I probably would still just stick to Noblesse. If you want to play Microwave Zhongli, right, so focusing on Zhongli's E damage, if you want your Boomerang to do a lot of damage, but yeah, like all of these characters, it's like, maybe I should separate Farazan from the rest, but at least other than Farazan, it's not a good thing, it's just like, you can use it if you want the funny ability to do a funny number, but that's basically it. All in all, this set is actually huge for the other characters at the very least though, and I think it's nice to have a skill damage focus set in the game. Next, let's talk about the Marechaussee Hunter set. 2-piece gives 15% normal and charge attack damage. The 4-piece gives you 12% crit rate when your HP changes. So whether you lose HP by consuming it with an ability, or getting a hit, or you restore HP, or assuming they don't fuck up their coding, if you increase max HP mid-combat with stuff like Yelan's C4, right? Those things will give you 12% crit rate, and you can get up to 3 stacks of that. Okay, well, we're gonna start with the non-leaks. Here's the thing about that set. There's no reliable way to trigger it at a baseline, right? In order to get it from heals, you need to take damage beforehand. And there's a lot of enemies that have attacks that are either incredibly slow, or don't do that much damage, or they do deal damage, but they also stagger you a lot, and then if you don't have a form of stagger resistance to interruption in your team, then you don't even want to like get staggered like that. Point being, right now, we don't have a good way of gaining stacks on like just any character. Like, the character needs to be able to have something in their kit that will play around with their health in order to be able to use it very well. However, it is possible, and in my opinion, fairly likely, that we eventually get a support who consumes their teammates' health, which would make this set potentially a lot stronger. If we do get that, a lot of characters are going to be able to use it. All of these characters that I've included here, and honestly, some of these too probably, but mostly these would be all the characters that would benefit a lot. I didn't put too much thought into comparing them to other options available, but 36% crit rate is a lot of crit rate. So even characters that don't focus on normal and charge attacks for the 2-piece will still be able to use the set. Now, the issue is that if there is a character that comes out and does that, just doing that isn't enough to justify being put on a team, right? Like, they need to also synergize with the team in some way. So even if a character comes out that does that, it might only apply to some of the characters here rather than all of them. So just keep in mind, if there is a character released in the future that consumes their teammates' HP, a lot of characters I'm not going to talk about are going to be viable with it. So Let's start by talking about Chao. The new set is good on Chao. However, Vermilion is also good on Chao. Vermilion just gives a lot more stats than the new set does, but the specific stat that it gives is a bit less good. The equivalent of more substats, basically, of attack. Then you gain crit rate with the new set, but attack isn't as good as crit rate. So it's basically going to boil down to a case-by-case scenario where if you have a lot of external attack buffs like Bennett, and you're not using a crit weapon where you're gonna end up over 100% crit rate, the crit set can be better, but in other situations, Vermilion will be better. All in all, is gonna be a competitive option with Vermilion, but the main difference is that, well, the other set is a broken-ass elemental skill set versus Echoes, which makes the domain a lot less resin inefficient to farm. So I think a lot of people might actually end up using the new set on Chao. Chao is obviously not the only character that consumes his own HP. When it comes to at least like on-fielders, you also have Hu Tao and Daya who can kinda. The thing about Daya is that Emblem is too good on her because she's just way too energy hungry. So it's just not gonna be better than Emblem if you're at C0. If you get to C4 and get the ER refund, then it can be better, and it is better than her quote-unquote signature set, the Vorukusha's Glow. Her quote-unquote signature set is really bad, so yeah. But if you are specifically either really high investment, like you have a C6 Daya, or if you're okay with the fact that Daya sucks and that you're not going to be able to have a good time all the way throughout, and you just want to have one really high damage elemental burst followed by 83 years of batterying, one almost viable damage elemental burst, then you can use the set. But other than that, it's Emblem. Next, Hu Tao. Now the thing with Hu Tao is, yes, she consumes her own health, but she also doesn't really want to be played with healers. And the only healer that provides enough for the team to actually be worth playing in her teams is Bennett. Technically, you can also play her with Diona, but Now, if you're playing her with Bennett, the first time you use your elemental skill, you will be at 70% HP, and Bennett won't heal, which means that for your first elemental skill, you will only be at 1 stack. Now, the second time you use it, you go below 70% HP, and Bennett can heal you. And if you're using relatively low HP pieces on your Bennett, like a +0 flower, whatever, and Bennett heals you less than 20% of Hu Tao's HP, then you can get 2 Bennett heals instead of 1, which will fully stack the artifact set. Now, from the wording, I would expect stacks duration to get refreshed whenever you gain a new one, because usually when stack duration is independent, they say it. But again, Mihoyo is not the greatest at consistency, so I'm going at it with that expectation, but it is possible I'm wrong, so just know that. Then you'll be over 70% HP. And then on the third rotation, well, you'll consume some of your health again, but this time it's going to be harder to make it so that Bennett heals you twice, because you'll be closer to 70% HP after using your E. Basically, over a long duration, you'll average out about 2 stacks per rotation, just straight up from your self-damage and healing from Bennett. But your first one will be at only 1, and your second one will be at 3. That can get increased if you get hit, but usually getting hit is not something you want, and it's not going to be the most reliable thing. Now, at 1 stack, it's not very good. Like, it's fine, but it's not as good as the other options. At 2 stacks, it is actually fairly competitive, and at 3 stacks, it's very good. All of this to say, specifically with the one Hu Tao team where you use Bennett, which is VV Vape, with Hu Tao, Bennett, Kazuha, Tingto, or something like that, there can be situations where the set is good. Outside of that, I don't expect it to be reliable enough. That being said, Hu Tao does have a bit of interruption resistance in her kit, and you get even more from Tingto, which means that it's a bit less punishing to take hits, so you might still be able to stack it, but then you're relying on enemy RNG, which is a bit more scuffed. Next up, I want to talk about Ayato. Ayato is like basically the only character that is at least sometimes used in Burgeon team as an on-fielder who is not the one who triggers the Burgeons. In basically every other Burgeon team, your on-field character is the one that's triggering Burgeon, or is one that doesn't really want to build for damage anyways, right? So either, well, if you're playing the Thundering Furry, you're going to be using Razor. Yeah, I mean, you can use Kokomi as well, but Kokomi can't crit, so it doesn't matter. Anyways, by being an on-field character that cares about crit in Burgeon teams, and then not only that, but also in normal attack focused on-field character. He has a reliable way to self-damage with the Burgeon procs, and he cares about normal attacks, so he can fully suck the passive and take advantage of the 15% normal attack damage bonus, which makes the new set actually really good on him in those teams. However, Ayato's good in a lot of different teams, so it's only one of his many teams where this is good. So it's still not like wow insane for him. And then the last one of the non-leaked characters that I included, honestly, I don't know if I should include Xiangling. The reason why I'm including her is because I know that people actually do set up speedruns with characters like Xiangling, where like sometimes people want to speedrun Chamber 2 or 3, and if you do that, then you can set up a speedrun with Xiangling by having Xiangling be at like 2 HP right before the chamber is over, and then you can potentially stack the set before you use your burst, and I would expect it to be snapshotable, but again, Hoyo and consistency are not they're not a match made in heaven. Honestly, I don't even know if I should include her. I think it's my Xiangling bias showing, but it is a thing if you're interested in Xiangling speedrunning, I guess. Now let's move on to content relating to leaks. So there's 3 leak characters that are actually going to be good with this new set. For those of you that have looked at leaks might know that Khemine is a skill damage focused character, but he's an on-field skill damage focused character, so he loses out on 25% of the damage from the new skill set, so it's not actually very good on him. Outside of him, right, we have Lenny. It is his signature set. He can consume his own HP, and he's a charge attack focused character. It's good on him. It's his best set. It's good. And next up we have Lynette, for whom it's a little bit more sus, because while it can't, like, she does have a way of consuming her own HP. It only happens after she does most of her damage. Like when you're using Lenny, you'll do a charge attack. Now when you're above 60% health, using a charge attack will consume 20% of your health. You'll go down to 80% and you'll be at 1 stack by the time your charge attack hits. After that, you do second charge attack. It happens again, but then this time Bennett's buff proc, so you're at 3 stacks already. With Lynette, assuming that it is snapshotable, in order to take full advantage of it, you'd have to E, wait 4 seconds, and then burst. And your E wouldn't benefit from it, only your burst would. It's not 4 seconds, it's like 2 seconds. Yeah, it's every second. So up to 3 seconds that you'd have to wait in order to use your burst, assuming that it is snapshotable. So it's fine on her, but it's not the default set I'd use on her, basically. I'd default to other things most of the time. And finally, we have a Hydro main character whose pre-release I still haven't recorded because I've been procrastinating, because I just don't want to admit how dogshit Hydro main character is. It can be used on Hydro MC. The thing is, Hydro MC's damage is so garbage that it's hard for me to recommend using a set that focuses on his damage or her damage, and I'd rather just use something like Noblesse. But even then, like, some of your damage is coming from skills, some of your damage is coming from burst. If you manage to land every burst hit, which is basically impossible, it's just not gonna happen. But in a perfect world where you do, burst is more damage than skill. In reality, skill is more damage than burst because your burst is not all landing. That's just not happening. Things don't work like that. So if you are focusing on damage, this is actually a decent set, right? Like you're getting, basically you will consume some of your own health if you're holding your E, so that's cool, but it's just, yeah, don't expect great things. But yeah, that basically does it for the 2 sets I wanted to, the 2 new upcoming sets. I think the skill set is like just a huge thing to have just in general. The HP set is a little bit more niche, but I do see the possibility that in the future it'll just be like, it'll be basically more versatile than Emblem. Like that's how good the effect can be, assuming you have a way to reliably get it. If you know which enemy you're fighting in advance and you know that it's enemies that change your HP a lot, like Rift Hounds, the new set might actually be just straight up very good on all of these characters already without needing a character that consumes their own HP. But it won't always be the case, so that's just something to keep in mind. And that's gonna do it. So thanks for dropping by, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.